Welcome to our channel. We're so glad you're here and we can't wait to share today's story with you. If you're ready for an unforgettable journey, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an exciting tale. We'd also love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. Your thoughts and feedback mean the world to us. Stay tuned because we've got something even more special lined up for you tomorrow. Don't miss out, subscribe now, and be part of our community. This protest went horribly wrong, and it wasn't what you expected. It was an ordinary day outside Buckingham Palace. Tourists crowded the square, snapping photos and posing in front of the grand historical structure. Street performers showed off their tricks, filling the air with a vibrant energy, while families gathered in cafes nearby, sipping their drinks and chatting about their adventures in London. But amidst this typical scene of tourism and peaceful routines, something was about to shift. A ripple of tension was starting to form, though no one could yet put their finger on it. Standing still, unwavering in his post, was Sergeant Michael Carter, a royal guard in full uniform. His tall, commanding figure stood like a statue, unmoving as always. The role of the royal guard, though shrouded in tradition, was one of strict discipline and silence. Their very presence symbolized strength and unwavering duty to the crown. Their stillness, their silence, it was more than just a protocol. It was a message, a powerful one, but one that most tourists could only admire from a distance. But not Emily Harrison. She was determined to make her presence felt. In her late 20s, she was a woman who stood out in the crowd, not only because of her vibrant green-dyed hair, but also because of the fire in her eyes. With a cardboard sign that read, "No planet, no peace," scrawled in messy black letters, she approached the royal guard. In her other hand, she held a water bottle, but it wasn't filled with water. It was filled with something far thicker, something meant to make a statement. Her presence was not one of mere protest, but one of provocation. As she walked toward the guard, her voice rang out over the plaza, cutting through the usual chatter. "This is what silence protects," she yelled, pointing directly at the royal guard. "A regime of fossil fuels, performers in red coats pretending they're not complicit." Her words echoed, causing some tourists to take a step back in unease, while others reached for their phones, eager to record what was happening. Protesters were nothing new to the area, but this woman had a fire in her, and as she continued to shout, the atmosphere around her began to change. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something more dangerous. The crowd buzzed with anticipation, wondering what she would do next. But the guards didn't move. Sergeant Carter remained as still as a statue, not giving an inch. Emily, undeterred, stepped even closer to him, walking right up to his towering presence. His expression, cold as granite, never wavered. His posture, perfect in its discipline, didn't shift even slightly. She was inches from him now, staring directly into the face of one of the most disciplined men in the world. But he did not flinch. His silence, it seemed, was impenetrable. "You want people to think this is order," she shouted, her voice gaining volume. "That standing still means strength, but silence is complicity. You're not statues, you're people, and if you choose to say nothing, you've chosen a side." The crowd grew even more tense, some unsure whether they should treat her like a protester or a threat. But still, Sergeant Carter didn't respond. His eyes were locked ahead, his face as unreadable as ever. His hands rested by his sides, holding his rifle with military precision. Emily raised her bottle, her voice trembling with passion, not fear. "This is blood," she cried, holding the bottle high for the cameras to see. "The blood of the earth, the blood spilled by silence." The crowd went silent for a moment, unsure of what was about to happen. And then, with a sudden motion, she threw the contents of the bottle onto his uniform. A thick red paint splattered across his chest, dripping onto his pristine red coat, staining it deeply. Gasps filled the air. The live stream exploded with comments. "She did it! Oh my God, she actually did it!" The crowd murmured, some in shock, others in excitement. But through all of this, Sergeant Carter stood unmoved. His posture was flawless. His expression was unchanged. He didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. The red paint splattered across his uniform, dripping from the buttons and soaking into the wool of his coat. Yet he remained as still as ever, embodying a power that was far greater than what anyone in the crowd had expected. As the protesters stood there, demanding a reaction, she was met with nothing but silence. No shouts, no retaliation, no anger. Just the quiet, unshakable discipline of a man who had mastered the art of composure. And in that silence, the world was reminded that true strength doesn't need to speak. Sergeant Carter had said everything, without uttering a single word, and Emily, now standing before him, could only stare at the wall of silence she had just created. The crowd stood in stunned silence as the red paint splattered across Sergeant Michael Carter's uniform. It was a shocking sight, one that no one could have predicted. The young activist, Emily Harrison, stood only inches away from him, her chest heaving, her breath coming in sharp bursts. She had thrown the paint with all her force, believing that this was the moment that would shake the system. She had expected a reaction, a confrontation, a struggle, perhaps even an arrest. But what she got was far more powerful than anything she could have imagined. Sergeant Carter didn't flinch, not even a slight movement. His stance remained unyielding, his face as still as marble. The red liquid dripped down his chest, pooling on the ground beneath him, but his posture remained immaculate. His rifle was held firmly at his side, and his eyes never wavered from the horizon, never acknowledging Emily's presence. The scene was almost surreal. A man covered in red, standing untouched, while the crowd around him buzzed with uncertainty. Emily, her hands trembling from the intensity of the moment, took a step back. She expected the chaos to escalate, but instead the air grew thick with something heavier than tension, something unnervingly calm. She had thrown the paint to make a statement, to provoke a reaction, to expose what she saw as the apathy of the world. But the guard's silence was a statement in itself. It was as if his stillness was an answer to everything she had shouted. She wasn't sure whether to feel victorious or helpless. "Why aren't you doing anything?" she shouted again, her voice louder now, almost desperate. "This is blood! You can't just stand there and pretend nothing is wrong!" Her words echoed through the plaza, but they were met with the same unrelenting silence. The people around her were no longer watching her with admiration. They were watching him. They were watching the royal guard, his stillness in the face of her fury, his unshakable discipline. The crowd, once filled with uncertainty, began to stir. Some whispered nervously, others clapped their hands, but not for Emily. The applause started slowly. At first just one or two people, then more joined in. The sound was soft at first, almost hesitant, but soon it became louder, stronger. The people were not applauding her act of defiance. They were applauding him. Sergeant Carter, standing as if nothing had changed, became the center of their attention. The applause wasn't for the spectacle of rebellion. It was for the unbreakable discipline he represented. It was for the strength in his silence. Emily, confused and rattled, stood frozen for a moment. Why were they clapping for him? She had expected them to rally behind her, to join her in denouncing the guard's silence. But instead, the crowd was reacting to his composure, his unwavering control. The realization hit her like a punch in the gut. She wasn't the one who held the power here. The royal guard had won this silent battle without saying a word. His stillness had rendered her protest meaningless. "Why are you clapping for him?" Emily demanded, her voice cracking with frustration. "He didn't do anything." But the crowd's response was clear. The guard had done something far more significant than she could have ever hoped to do. He had remained unchanged, untouched by the chaos she had tried to provoke. His silence had become a louder statement than any of her words could ever be. But the moment was far from over. Just as the crowd began to settle, another figure appeared in the distance. Another royal guard, Corporal James Mitchell, stepped into view, walking with the same sharp precision as his counterpart. His uniform was pristine, untouched by the chaos of the earlier scene. As he approached, the crowd parted like the red, see giving way to the flawless professionalism of the guards. Without a word, the scene unfolded like a well-rehearsed military drill. Corporal Mitchell stepped forward, and the officer accompanying him smoothly removed the stained jacket from Sergeant Carter. In a seamless motion, the jacket was swapped for a fresh one, untouched by the protest, untouched by the paint. The transition was flawless, mechanical, and carried out without hesitation. It was a display of efficiency, of discipline, of the very qualities that made the Royal Guard an icon of unyielding control. Emily stood there, speechless, as the original guard returned to his post. The red was gone. The protest was erased. The message she had fought so hard to convey had been wiped away in mere seconds. The Royal Guard, now spotless and pristine once again, stood tall, rifle in hand, eyes fixed ahead, as if the entire incident had never happened. To the world, it seemed as if nothing had changed. Emily's heart sank. She had expected a clash, a confrontation, even a fight. What she hadn't expected was the power of absolute control. What she hadn't expected was that the Royal Guard's silence and discipline would speak louder than any protest could ever hope to. And in that moment, she realized the true power of composure, the ability to stand firm, to remain unshaken, no matter what chaos rages around you. The world, she realized, was watching a different kind of strength, one that didn't need to shout to be heard. The crowd's applause was like a wave crashing against Emily, leaving her stunned, disoriented. She stood there, eyes wide, her breath heavy as she struggled to comprehend what had just happened. She had expected chaos, a scene of resistance, but instead she had walked straight into the quiet force of discipline, a force she had underestimated. The Royal Guard, standing tall and unmoving, became something more than a mere symbol of tradition. To the crowd, he was now a symbol of unshakable strength. The paint on his uniform, the act of rebellion, seemed almost insignificant in comparison. To his composure, Emily's hands trembled as she took a step back, her mind racing. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She was supposed to provoke a response, spark a conversation, or at the very least, draw attention to the cause she so passionately believed in. But now, as the applause continued around her, she realized the truth. It wasn't her message that was resonating. It was the silence of the guard. It was his ability to stand unflinching, unbothered by the chaos swirling around him. That was the true power. That was what captured the attention of the crowd. She felt a wave of frustration wash over her. This wasn't how the protest was supposed to play out. Her purpose, her voice, everything she had come here to stand for was now overshadowed by the very man she had hoped to expose. She opened her mouth to shout again, to challenge him, but the words caught in her throat. They seemed hollow, meaningless now. The crowd wasn't listening to her anymore. Their eyes weren't on her, they were on him. They were watching his stillness, his ability to remain composed in the face of her provocation. And in that stillness, they saw something stronger than her anger, stronger than her message. "Say something," Emily shouted, her voice cracking with desperation. "Do something. You can't just stand there pretending nothing is wrong." She was almost pleading now, hoping for a reaction, any sign that the guard was human, that he could be moved. But he didn't budge. Not a flicker of emotion crossed his face. His eyes remained locked forward, his posture as rigid as ever. And then, something unexpected happened. From the side of the square, a second Royal Guard appeared. Corporal James Mitchell, his uniform pristine, his movements sharp and precise. As he walked towards Sergeant Carter, the crowd parted once again, creating a path for the flawless efficiency of the Royal Guard. It was almost as if this had been rehearsed, a well-orchestrated routine. The new guard's presence was like a cold breeze, sharpening the air around them. The crowd watched in silence, unsure of what was happening. Without a word, Corporal Mitchell and his team moved into action. The officer standing behind Sergeant Carter reached up to remove the stained uniform jacket. The transition was swift and smooth. No words, no hesitation, just a practiced motion. In a matter of seconds, Sergeant Carter was stripped of his red jacket, and the fresh, untouched one was passed to him. It was a seamless, mechanical motion, The red paint, the symbol of rebellion, was now gone, replaced by a pristine coat of vibrant crimson. The crowd watched, captivated, as the first guard, now stripped of his ruined jacket, stood tall once more. The stain had been erased, the message washed away. No chaos, no argument, just a quiet, methodical reset. Sergeant Carter was now perfect again, flawless in his uniform, rifle held at his side, standing as if nothing had ever happened. The protest, the paint, the confrontation, all of it was erased in a matter of moments. Emily stood there, her mouth slightly open, eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before her. The moment she had hoped would bring attention to her cause, to the urgency of her message, had been wiped away without a word, without a single act of defiance. The guard, as silent and disciplined as ever, had turned the tide with his absolute control. The crowd, which had once been uncertain, now stood in awe. The applause, which had started tentatively, grew stronger, more certain. It wasn't for Emily anymore. It was for the guard. It was for his ability to remain calm, to endure the chaos without losing his composure. The true power of the moment had shifted, and Emily was left in its wake, her message fading into the background. She tried once more, her voice rising above the applause. "You think this is strength?" she demanded, her words now tinged with anger. "You think standing there like a puppet is bravery?" But the crowd wasn't listening to her anymore. They were watching the guard, the man who had remained silent in the face of her fury. And in that silence they saw something far more powerful than her anger, something she hadn't expected to witness. They saw strength, true strength. The one that doesn't need to shout, doesn't need to react. Just the ability to stand firm, no matter what comes at you. And in that moment, Emily realized that the guard had won. She had come to protest the silence, but it was his silence that had spoken louder than anything she could ever say. As the seconds ticked by, Emily stood frozen, her eyes locked onto the royal guard. The paint that had once been a symbol of rebellion now clung to his uniform like an accusation, a mark of her failed protest. But Sergeant Michael Carter stood as if untouched by it all, his stance unwavering, his face as unreadable as stone. The crowd, once murmuring with uncertainty, now buzzed, with a mix of awe and confusion. Their attention was no longer on Emily, but on him. They were watching the power of his stillness, the power of his discipline unfold before their eyes. But Emily wasn't finished. The reality of the situation was sinking in, and she couldn't let it go. This wasn't how it was supposed to play out. She wasn't the one who was supposed to be powerless. She had expected confrontation, resistance, a fight. But here she was, standing in front of a man who refused to react, a man who seemed completely unshaken, and worse, unbothered. She clenched her fists at her sides, her frustration building, her words spilling out in an angry rush. "You think you've won?" she shouted, her voice cutting through the tense air. "You think standing there like a statue makes you strong? It makes you a coward, hiding behind your silence." Her chest was heaving with emotion, her anger spilling over, but no one around her was cheering. No one was rallying behind her cause. The applause had faded, and now the crowd was silent, their eyes on the guard. Emily's words seemed to bounce off his stoic presence and fall flat at her feet. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. She had lost control. Her voice cracked as she called out again. "This is the problem. You're all complicit. In this facade, this costume. Do you think this is real strength?" She stepped forward again, trying to provoke him, to get something, anything, a response. But Sergeant Carter didn't flinch. He didn't even look at her. He remained as he was, perfectly composed, his attention still fixed straight ahead. The other tourists, once drawn to her, now watched the guard with reverence. Her message, her protest, her anger, it had all dissolved in the face of his unwavering silence. The tension in the air seemed to stretch, growing thicker with each passing second. It was as if the whole plaza was holding its breath, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But nothing did. And then, just when it seemed like the moment couldn't get more intense, another figure appeared from the side. A second royal guard, Corporal James Mitchell, stepped into view. His uniform was crisp and clean, untouched by the chaos of the earlier confrontation. As he walked towards Sergeant Carter, the crowd parted once more, as if instinctively making way for the flawless precision of the Royal Guard. The air around them seemed to shift with the arrival of this new figure, and the crowd fell silent again, their attention now fully on what was unfolding before them. Without a word, Corporal Mitchell and the officer accompanying him began to move with practiced efficiency. In a smooth, almost mechanical motion, they approached Sergeant Carter and began removing his stained jacket. The officer stepped forward to take the ruined uniform off, while Corporal Mitchell handed him a fresh, clean jacket. The entire process was executed flawlessly. No panic, no words, just a silent and efficient exchange. Within seconds, Sergeant Carter was back in his pristine uniform, the red coat free from the paint that had stained it just moments ago. Emily watched, stunned and powerless, as the once defiant message she had hoped to send was completely erased. The stain of rebellion, the mark of her protest, was gone. The guard stood tall again as if nothing had ever happened. His composure remained perfect, his eyes fixed straight ahead, and the crowd watched in awe. The applause began again, this time even louder. The people were no longer clapping for her. They were clapping for the guard, for his unshakable discipline, for his ability to withstand everything without moving an inch. In that moment it was clear. Sergeant Carter had turned the tide, and Emily was left in the dust. Her heart sank as she realized what had just happened. She had come here to challenge the system, to make a statement, but what she had witnessed was something far more powerful than her anger. She had been swept away in the tide of his stillness, and the world had seen it. There was no fight, no chaos, just the quiet, powerful statement of a man who refused to break. The protester had become the one who was shaken, the one who had lost her voice, her control, and her narrative. The second guard, now perfectly dressed and back at his post, stood alongside Sergeant Carter. The world had seen what happened. Not a clash, but a lesson in the true power of composure. Emily's protest had been broadcast across the internet, but the only thing people remembered was the strength of the guard's silence. And in that silence, she had lost. Emily stood there, her hands still clenched into fists at her sides, watching as Sergeant Michael Carter and Corporal James Mitchell returned to their posts, the paint now gone from their uniforms. The pristine, untouched red coat now gleamed under the London sun, as if nothing had ever happened. The crowd, which had once been captivated by her words, now stood in stunned silence, their attention fully fixed on the unyielding discipline of the Royal Guard. The applause had slowed, but the sentiment remained clear. It was no longer for her. It was for him. She felt a pit form in her stomach. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. She had imagined the scene playing out differently. She had imagined the crowd rallying behind her, joining in her protest, fueling her defiance. She had expected them to see the same truth she saw. That silence in the face of global crisis was complicity. But instead, they had seen strength in the guard's silence, and Emily was left in the background, her words lost in the echo of his unwavering composure. The cameras were still rolling, the live stream capturing every moment. But it wasn't her message that was going viral anymore. It was the guard's stillness. It was the moment when he stood there, unshaken, as the red paint stained his uniform. It was the way he didn't even flinch. The footage was already flooding social media, captioned with phrases like, "The real strength is in silence," and "True power doesn't need to speak." And there she was, the protester, the one who had come to make a statement, now fading from the narrative entirely. Emily's thoughts raced as she tried to make sense of it all. The raw emotion, the anger, the urgency that had fueled her steps, just moments ago now seemed distant, washed away by the overwhelming presence of the guard's unmovable strength. She had expected a clash, a battle, a fight to be remembered. Instead, she had been met with a wall of discipline, a wall she couldn't break, couldn't even make a dent in. As she stood there watching the Royal Guard return to his position, With his rifle upright and his eyes forward, she could feel the weight of her failure. Her protest had not been the story. Her anger had not been the story. The story had shifted. It was no longer about the environment or the cause she had so passionately fought for. It was about the guard. It was about his strength, his ability to endure without moving, without reacting. And in that strength, the message she had hoped to send had been swallowed whole. A soft murmur started to rise from the crowd. The applause had stopped, but the murmur grew into something stronger, more certain. The people were talking, but not about Emily's message. They were talking about the guard's response, or rather, his lack of response. They were talking about his ability to stand tall, unshaken by the chaos she had tried to create. The murmur turned into whispers of admiration, of respect. It was the kind of respect that only comes from witnessing something truly extraordinary, something that transcends the ordinary, the loud, and the chaotic. The crowd was witnessing discipline, something they hadn't expected, something they hadn't anticipated, and they couldn't help but respect it. "Why are they applauding him?" Emily muttered to herself, her voice barely audible over the rising hum of the crowd. She couldn't understand. She had thrown everything into this protest, had poured every ounce of herself into making people see the truth she believed in. But now, it felt like the world had turned on its head. The crowd wasn't standing with her. They were standing with him. The camera crew, who had been so eager to capture her every word, now seemed unsure of what to focus on. Emily's face, flushed with frustration and disbelief, was no longer the focal point. The guards had become the center of attention. They were the ones who had captured the narrative, and in that moment, Emily knew her protest had failed. She had lost control of the story, and in its place was something far more powerful. A lesson in restraint, in composure, in strength that couldn't be shaken, no matter how loud the world became. As the footage of the event spread across the internet, Emily's name began to trend, but not in the way she had imagined. Clips of her shouting, of her frustration, were shared alongside shots of the royal guard, unbothered by her words, his composure unbroken. The more the video spread, the more people realized that the true power lay not in what she had done, but in how he had responded, or rather, how he hadn't. The protester had come to make a point, to provoke a reaction, but it was the royal guard who had made the most powerful statement of all. Silence is not weakness. It is a form of strength that no one can undo, no matter how loud they scream. And in that silence, Emily realized she had been the one who had been defeated. What do you think of the story we just shared? Was the royal guard's response the true act of strength, or did Emily's protest deserve more recognition? I want to hear your thoughts on this dramatic moment of silence and rebellion. Do you believe that silence can be more powerful than a loud protest? Or is it the act of speaking out that drives change? Let me know where you stand in the comments below. Do you agree with the idea that composure and discipline can be a form of strength, even in the face of chaos? Or do you think it's essential to challenge the status quo, even if it means making a scene? I'd love to hear your perspective, whether you're on Emily's side, rooting for the change she's trying to make, or if you admire the guard's unwavering discipline. Drop a comment, share your opinions, and let's keep this conversation going. Remember, your feedback is what helps us improve and share even more compelling stories. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, and subscribe to stay tuned for more exciting content. I can't wait to read your thoughts, so let's talk in the comments.